in our lesson today, and I would like us to look at percentages. This word percent, the word percent, is a combination of two words, per, which means division, or basically out of. And the other part of the word percent is cent, which is actually a Latin word that means 100 parts. So if you combine the two words to form the word percent, it will have a meaning of out of 100. Out of 100, or basically out of 100 parts. Out of 100 parts. And the symbol used for the word percentage is this one here. This is the symbol that is used. We need also to understand that percentages can be expressed as a symbol, can be expressed as a symbol, a fraction, or a decimal. That is a decimal number. For example, 80%. This can be expressed as bearing the symbol. This is 80%. And the same can be expressed as a fraction, which is 80 out of 100. Or its equivalent fraction, which is actually 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 is an equivalent fraction to 80 out of 100. And this, when expressed as a decimal, we can use any division method that we know and obtain the value 0.8. So in essence, what I'm saying is that 80% can be equated to 80 all over 100 as a fraction, or its equivalent, that is 4 out of 5, or it is also expressed as a decimal, that is 0.8. So having brought in the idea of equivalent fractions, we can now move on and try to look at how do we write equivalent fractions. If you are given one fraction, are we able to express it in its equivalent, or one fraction we write its equivalent fraction? But these fractions, we are not going to just to write equivalent fractions, but we want to express the equivalent fraction which has a denominator of 100. How to write equivalent fractions? With denominators of 100. When I'm talking about the denominator, this is basically the lower part of a fraction. The lower part of a fraction that we must ensure it is 100. Examples. This can be illustrated using examples for us to understand. We can have a question like this. We are required to write the following. With denominators of 100. And our first example, we are going to use a fraction that is 2 out of 5. Our fraction is 2 out of 5. When we are looking at the solution of this particular fraction, we are supposed to ensure that we have an equivalent fraction where the denominator is 100. It is important that we take note of that. And how do we achieve that? That is what we are going to look at. The first step, I call it step number 1, is for us taking into consideration the type of denominator that we have. In this particular fraction, 2 is the numerator, while 5 is the denominator. It will be easy for us to get an equivalent fraction if 100 is a multiple of 5, or a multiple of that denominator in the fraction that we are given. So we look for a number such that when we multiply that number by this denominator of ours, will give us 100. And the same number should be multiplied by the numerator so that we don't change anything. So that our initial fraction and its equivalent, they are the same. If you simplify the equivalent fraction, you will be able to go back to our initial fraction. So the first step is for us to look for a number, a whole number, such that when multiplied by 5 will give us 100, and that number will be 20. So to get the equivalent fraction, 2 all over 5, when we multiply 2 by 5, when we multiply 2 by 20 and 5 by 20, we are going to get the numerator will be 40, while the denominator will be 100. Looking at this equivalent fraction, the new fraction that we have, we will have achieved what we intended to do. Our second example is 17 out of 20. This is another fraction that we want to get its equivalent. As I have said in the first example, we are going to look for a number that when we multiply by our denominator, and in this case 20, we will get 100. Another easy way of getting that particular number, you basically take 100 and you divide by 20. This will give you that number as 5. So that is the first step. So our equivalent fraction will be we will multiply our numerator by 5, and this will give us, we will use any multiplication method that we know to solve the numerator. We can have 17 multiplied by 5. 5 multiplied by 7 will give us 35. We write 5, carry 3. Carry 3. 5 multiplied by 1, it will give us 5 plus 3, it will give us 8. So our numerator here will be 85. And the same can be done to get the denominator. This is 20 multiplied by 5. 5 multiplied by 0, it will give us 0. Any number multiplied by 0, it will give us a 0. And 5 multiplied by 2, it will actually give us 100. So our denominator will be 100. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that an equivalent fraction to 17 out of 20 is basically 85 out of 100. That will be 85 out of 100. Let us look at a third example. Example number 3. And in this particular example, we have a number like 49 out of 50. This is a fraction. The numerator is 49 and our denominator this time round is 50. We want to write an equivalent fraction to this one that we have. Now, what we are basically relying on is the kind of denominator that we have. And our denominator is 50. As I had said in the previous 2 examples, you look for a number that when you multiply it by the denominator, it will give you 100. And this number is number 2. So that number will be multiplied by the denominator, and also the same operation should be done or applied on the numerator. At the end of it, we will have an equivalent fraction to 49 out of 50. 49 multiplied by 2 we will arrange it in column form. 9 multiplied by 2, this will give us 18, and we write 8. We carry 1. 9 multiplied by 4, that will give us 8, plus the 1 that we had carried, it will give us 9. So 49 times 2, it will be 98. And 50 multiplied by 2 will give us 100. So an equivalent fraction to 49 out of 50, an equivalent fraction to this will be 98 out of 100. That will be 98 out of 100. I want us now to look at one last example on how to write an equivalent fraction if you are given a fraction. And my last example is 7 out of 25. My viewers, the same procedure that we have applied in the above 3 examples will be applied to execute this so that we achieve the results that we desire. We will look for a number. When you multiply it by 25, it will give us 100. And this particular number is number 4. The same number should be multiplied by the numerator so that when we simplify our equivalent fraction, we will get our initial fraction. 7 multiplied by 4, it will actually give us 28. And you can even ascertain this by using the calculator. It is another option available to us. 25 multiplied by 4, we will get 100. So what I'm trying to drive at is that an equivalent fraction to 7 out of 25 is 28 out of 100. This particular knowledge that we have just learned on how to write an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100 is applied in converting fractions and even decimals into percentages. Remember, today we are learning about percentages. So we can move on and look at how do we convert fractions and decimals to percentages. We can break it into 2 parts such that we first of all deal with the conversion of fractions into percentages, and later on we will look at conversion of decimals into percentages. Conversion of fractions to percentages. To execute this, there are 2 methods available to us, and these methods depends on the type of denominator that we have. If 100 is a multiple of the given denominator, we can be able to apply the 2 methods. And in the case that 100 is not a multiple of the denominator in the fraction that we are given, we will only apply the second method. So we can say there are 2 methods. To be applied when converting fractions to percentages. This can be learned better with the use of examples. And I want us to move on to examples so that we can see how the 2 methods that I've just stated can be applied. write each of the following as a percentage. And our first example is 19 out of 20. 19 out of 20. In our solution, we are going to apply the two methods to solve this. So we will look at method 1, that is the first method. And in this first method, we are going to write an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100. We first of all write an equivalent fraction to this that has a denominator 100. Denominator of 100. As I have said, that we are in solving this, we are going to write an equivalent fraction to 19 out of 20 that has a denominator of 100. This is a concept that we have already learned. We look for a number that when we multiply with the 20, it will give us 100, and the same number will be multiplied by 19. So this number will be 5. And the equivalent fraction to 19 out of 20 9 times 5, it will give us 45. 5 times 1, that will be 5 plus 4, that will give us 95. So the equivalent fraction to 19 out of 20 will be 95 out of 100. And 95 out of 100 is the same as 95%. That is applying the first method. If we apply the second method, we basically multiply the given fraction directly by 100%. And when we multiply by 100%, we will cancel out common factors, then simplify the fraction that we have. We will multiply the fraction by 100%, then we cancel out the common factors and then simplify the answer that we have. And our fraction is 19 out of 20. We multiply this by 100%. The common factors between 20 and 100 is this particular number 20. because 20 goes into 20 once, into 100 5 times. So this will give us 19 multiplied by 5%, which actually will give us 95%. So ultimately, the two methods are leading us to the same answer. The two methods are leading us to the same answer. But when you are applying this first method that we have learned, it has its limitations. And the limitations, one of the limitations is that if 100 is not one of the multiples of the denominator, we cannot convert, or we cannot write an equivalent fraction to the given fraction. That leaves us with only method 2 to solve such fractions. And this will be illustrated in the second example. And my second example is 3 out of 8. We want to convert this particular fraction into a percentage. And the denominator here is 8. When you look at the multiples of 8, 100 is not one of them. So we cannot apply the first method. That leaves us with the second method to solve this particular question. So in doing that, we are going to multiply our fraction by 100%. We will need to cancel out the common factors between this denominator 8 and the number 100 that we have here. And that will be 4. 4 is one of the common factors. 4 goes into 8 2 times, into 100 25 times. This will give us 3 multiplied by 25% all over 2. And when we multiply 3 by 25%, we will get 75%, which will be divided by 2. 75% divided by 2, we use any division method that we know. To get 37.5%. So I'm saying that 3 out of 8 is equivalent to 37.5%. Three out of 8 is equal to 37.5%. Let us look at another example so that we can internalize this particular concept. This time round, let us consider a simple fraction, something like a half. We want to convert this fraction to percentage. As we have learned in the previous two examples, that we look for a number such that when we multiply by the denominator, and in this case our denominator is 2, it should give us 100. I had said in the first example, you can do that mentally or you can do it manually, whereby you take 100, which is the end results, then you divide by this number 2 that we have, and this will give us the number as 50. So this 50 is going to be multiplied by both the numerator and the denominator, so that we get an equivalent fraction to this. This will give us 50 out of 100, which is actually 50% if we use the first method. And if we apply the second method, we will have a half multiplied by 100%. We cancel out the common factors. This is 2 into 2, 1 into 100, 50 times. So we'll have 1 multiplied by 50%, giving us 50%. We can also look at another example. This is 7 out of 25. We want to convert this particular fraction, 7 out of 25, to percentage. This time round, we are going to limit ourselves to the first method, because the second one can also apply to solve the same. We look for a number such that when it is multiplied by our denominator, which is 25, it should give us 100. This is 100 multiplied by our denominator, which is 25. It gives us the number 4. So we are going to have 7 multiplied by 4 and also 25 multiplied by 4. When we take 7 multiplied by 4, this will give us 28. And when we take 25 multiplied by 4, we are going to get 100. So our equivalent fraction will be 28 out of 100. And this can be expressed as 28%. That was our first bit of converting fractions to percentages. And I would like us now to move on and start converting decimals into percentages, which is a very easy method, as you can see. As you will see, this particular operation basically involves multiplication of the given decimal number by 100%. This multiplication of the decimal number by 100%, it is the same as moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. And I would like to take this opportunity to express this through examples so that we can understand better. And our first example is 0.07. This is a decimal number. We want to convert it to percent. We said the first step, or the only step that we have, is that we multiply this particular number by 100%. .07 multiply by 100. We can arrange it in column form so that we can multiply. Manually, or you can use the calculator to perform this particular operation. 7 multiplied by 0, it will give us 0. And a number multiplied by 0, it will always give us a 0. 7 multiplied by another 0, it will give us a 0. 7 multiplied by 1, it will give us 7. How many decimal places do we have in the initial number? They are 2. So it is like we have our decimal point here, we move it 2 places, 1, 2. This we are going to have 7.0%, or it can just be expressed as 7%. So 0.07 is equal to 7%. 0.07 is equal to 7%. That is our first example. Our second example will be 0.73. We write the number 0.73 as a percentage. This involves multiplication of that particular number by 100%. And you can use a calculator, or we can do it manually, which is the same as 100%, 100 multiplied by 73. Three multiplied by 0, it will give us a 0. 3 multiplied by 0, it will give us another 0. 3 multiplied by 1, it will give us 3. 7 multiplied by 0, it will give us 0. This will be another 0. Then 7 multiplied by 1, it will give us 7. Then we add. This will give us 0, 0, 3, 7. How many decimal places did we have in the initial decimal number? 2. So we count 2 decimal places from the right towards the left. This is 1, 2. So we have, this will be the same as 73%. So we are saying 0.73 is the same as 73%. Let us look at another example. We express the number 1.13 as a percentage. The same procedure that we have learned in the previous 2 examples will apply here. We will have our number 1.13 multiplied by 100%. We arrange our numbers in column form so that we can proceed with multiplication. 3 times 0, it will be a 0. 3 times 0, it will be another 0. 3 multiplied by 1, it will give us 3. 1 multiplied by 0, it will give us a 0. This will give us another 0. This will give us 1. This other one, 1 multiplied by 0, it will give us a 0. One multiplied by the other 0, it will give us a 0, and 1 multiplied by 1, it will give us 1. Then we proceed with addition of these numbers. This will be brought down here. This will be brought down here. This will be 3, 1, 1. And then we count the number of decimal places that we have in the initial number. Those are 2 decimal places. So we count from the right towards the left. This is 1, 2. We move the decimal place 2 places to the left. So this will give us 113%. So we are saying 1.13 multiplied by 100% is giving us 113%. That is the number. 1.13 is the same as 113%. So having looked at conversion of fractions to percentages and decimals to percentages, it is also good that we try to look at how can we convert given percentages to either fractions or decimals. That is conversion of percentages to fractions. Or we can also say writing percentages as fractions. This will be illustrated in examples. Following 2 vital steps. The first step is to write the given percentage as a fraction and the second step is to simplify that fraction. That means the fraction should be in its simplest form. Let us look at examples. We write each of the following. Percentage as a fraction. And our first example is 58%. How do we write 58%? as a fraction. We have said in the first step, we need to write this percentage as a fraction. And 58% is the same as 58 out of 100. Then the second step is to simplify. This fraction. And to simplify this particular fraction, we use the highest common factor. The highest common factor, which is actually the number 2. $58 divided by 2, we will get 29. $100 divided by 2, we will get 50. And this will give us 29 out of 50. This will give us 29 out of 50. Let us look at another example on how to convert percentages to fractions. And that will be 37%. How do we convert 37% to a fraction? We go through the 2 steps that we have just learned, that we first of all write this particular number as a fraction, then we simplify that particular fraction, and 37% is the same as 37 out of 100. Percent means 100. When we look at this number 37 and 100, we cannot simplify it any further because we don't have any common factor. And if that is the case, we leave it at this particular point. But 7% is the same as 37 out of 100 as a fraction. Let us look at another example. We can have 6.5%. We want to convert 6.5% to a fraction. Our step number 1 is to write this percentage as a fraction, which will be 6.5 out of 100. The second step this time round will not just be simplification of this particular fraction, because remember our numerator here is a mixed fraction. To make it a whole number, we can decide to double the numerator, and the same should be done to the denominator, so that we have a whole number as the numerator. And doubling means multiplication by 2 in this case. This will be 6.5 multiplied by 2, and also 100 multiplied by 2. This will give us 13 out of 200. And looking at 13 out of 200, we cannot be able to simplify it any further, because we don't have any common factor between 13 and 200. We can look at another example, which is our last example, that is converting 40% to a fraction. And as usual, the steps that we have learned should be applied here. Step number 1, we write this percentage as a fraction. 40% will be the same as 40 out of 100. And our second step involves simplification of this particular fraction, 40 out of 100, by using the highest common factor, or even cancellation. We have 40 out of 100. Remember, 0 and 0 can cancel, so that we end up with 4 out of 10. And the highest common factor between 4 and 10 is actually the number 2. So 2 into 4, 2 times, 2 into 10, that is 5, giving us 2 out of 5. This basically means that 40% is the same as 2 out of 5. 40% is the same as 2 out of 5 as a fraction. That brings us to the end of today's lesson. And in our next lesson, we will be looking at how to convert percentages to decimals.